Welcome to the Sonic Days podcast, home of all things audio. This season was recorded live at Sonic Days 2024. In this episode, we explore the first steps of an exciting journey, Struer Museum's transformation into a museum dedicated to sound and listening. Together with Anne-Sofie Udsen, museum curator at Struer Museum, and Kreutzfeldt, head of the National Center of Sonic Cultural Heritage, we'll dive into the ideas shaping this new direction.
Well, hello everyone. As Birgitte said, I'm Anne-Sofie Udsen, and I'm a museum curator at the Struer Museum, and I have a PhD in the sound studies and gender studies. And at Struer Museum, I'm also the head of research. And today, me and Jacob is going to present himself further. But we are going to talk about Struer Museum and our new knowledge center in Struer. And I chose to name our presentation towards a Sonic Cultural History Museum. So I'm going to talk about the museum for the first 20 minutes, and then Jacob is going to take over and present the center. So just a little background about Struer and being a museum in what we call the City of Sound. Because as some of you may know, Struer is known as Denmark's City of Sound, and it is the only municipality in the world that invests in sound as its main driver for local development and growth. And a lot of people ask, why did you choose this focus as a whole municipality? And it is mainly because of Bang & Olufsen, the Danish audio company who started and was founded in Struer 99 years ago. So we're also going to have an anniversary for them next year at the museum. And so the city's focus on sound has sort of developed out to three main branches, which we can divide out to industry and culture and education. So in the industry part of the city, we have Bang & Olufsen, of course, but we also have the Sound Hub Denmark, which is the world's first international sound technology and innovation environment for companies and entrepreneurs that want to be world-class within the field of audio technologies. Then we also have the culture branch, which the museum is of course also a part of, but where we also have our partner Sound Art Lab, which is a work environment for development and production of artistic exploration and engagement into sound and listening. And they are also the organizers of the biannual international sound and listening festival that is called Struer Tracks, which we highly recommend you to attend the next time. And then lastly, Struer Municipality also focuses on sound as part of education. And for example, we have the Sound Lab that already from the elementary school kids introduces sound for them even when they are 5 or 6 years old. And then it follows the kids and the young folks in Struer all the way up through the gymnasium. And then we have, when they go into higher education, we have the educational initiative Struer, which you can also check out. So that is just for you to understand, because Struer as a sound museum is not like a closed entity. It is part of a bigger sound environment in the whole municipality where we really support each other and try to make people from all kinds of industry and culture and education to come and work with us in the city and collaborate. But I'm going to talk especially about the museum today. So a little background about Struer Museum. So we are a local history museum, and we are located in Struer, which is in Western Jutland. And we have 2,300 square meters of exhibition divided into 5 exhibition spaces. So it's actually a pretty huge museum for the municipality that it is part of. And we have about 17,000 annual visitors. And we, of course, with the new museum, want this number to become even higher. And as of right now, our exhibitions, we have a big Bang & Olufsen exhibition at the museum, and we're going to make a new one next year for their 100-year anniversary. So come visit us, maybe in 2026. Then it will be totally done. Then we also have the Sound Universe, which is a whole floor where you can explore what sound is as a medium and how you use your ear to listen to sound. And so both technology and natural sciences, but also cultural aspects of sound. And then we also have the Bookhold House, which is a local house museum that we have at the museum where we have a sound installation as part of the house museum to try to recreate the atmosphere of this old home from the 1920s. Yeah. And so, as part of the City of Sound, Struer Museum has worked with incorporating sound and listening into our museological practice since 2008. And so, just a brief overview of what we have already done. So, in 2008, we reopened the museum with a new building at 700 square meters of Bang & Olufsen exhibitions on 2 floors. And then in 2016, we opened the new exhibition, The Sound Universe. And then in the last 2 or 3 years, it has really taken off because in 2022, we made the installation for the Buchholz House, which was part of a research project that was funded by Velux that was called Soundscapes in Historical Buildings. And then we also made a new strategy for the museum, which made a clear focus on sound and listening, so not only local history anymore. And then as of this year, it really starts to take off, because we also updated our articles of association, so we have a clear focus on sound and listening and local history. And we also constituted a new board and then also created a bold new vision, which is what I'm really going to talk about today. So, the bold new vision, we want to be the world's first sonic cultural history museum. And we have chosen this title both because we are thinking about, is it gonna be the first? And also to maybe strike a chord with some of you, because maybe you're thinking, but you're not, because I know this museum in this part of the world. And if you do, please tell us, because we are really trying to explore what is already out in the world, but it's very difficult to find out, actually. But so, what do we mean when we say that we are gonna create a sonic cultural history museum? We mean that it's a cultural history museum that is focused on disseminating sound and listening cultures. And we want to highlight and engage the public in how sound and listening affect our lives and histories, and what we can learn from the past, here in the present, and how we can affect the sounds of the future. And so we also want to make a distinction between sonic dissemination and disseminating sonic cultures. So, as Alcina also said in her talk before us, many museums today are using sound in the museums to disseminate and to tell stories and to create atmospheres. So, we disseminate culture with sound. But we think that to become a sonic cultural history museum, we also have to engage with disseminating sonic cultures. And this can also be done silently. We don't always have to use sound to tell stories about sonic cultures. It can also be done through visual and written elements. And so our goal is not to create a phonocentric museum, but instead to engage the public in sensory histories through guiding them into new perspectives through the sonic. So we want to open their ears, as we say, by revisiting the history that we already know through another sense than seeing, and ask questions such as how might our history unfold through our ears, and how might we understand certain places, peoples, events, and traditions if we start by listening to them. So, how did we develop this vision? As I said, we started by updating our articles of association. Our time period at the museum is from the 1500s and forward, but we especially focus on the industrialization and forward. And we also have a geographical responsibility at the museum because we are a state-recognized museum in Denmark, so we have certain expectations from the state. So we have a responsibility for the Struer municipality, which means that we have to disseminate local history as part of our work. But the big new thing in our articles is that we have this paragraph. The museum is particularly dedicated to actualizing and making available knowledge about sonic cultural heritage, as well as securing this heritage for future use based on the overall topic, sound, human, and world. And it sounds maybe not that big of a deal, but we are actually the first state-recognized museum in Denmark who has sound in this way as part of our articles of association. So that is a big win for a small museum. So after we got this paragraph as part of our articles of association, we started to unfold this vision of becoming a sonic cultural heritage museum. And we did this with the architecture firm called Shack Studios. And we started by asking together with them, what does it mean to be a sonic cultural history museum? Especially, how do we explain this to people? Because every time we say sonic, people say, what does that mean? Is it sound? Is it music? And what does sonic cultural heritage mean? Is it something with music? And so, how do we also visualize it? Because we were working with an architecture firm and they are visual people, and their job and what we paid them to was trying to visualize this idea for us. So what we felt that we had to do was to try to build a shared language with these visual folks, because by trying to create a language with them, we found ways to also explain it to funds when we had to talk to them and try to explain them the idea, because they were even harder to explain what the Sonic Cultural History Museum was. We started to ask questions like, what is sound and sonic culture when it is not music? For example, in the beginning with the architecture firm, a lot of the visualizations were of notes and of speakers and of sound waves, and we were like, we have to be able to disseminate sound in other ways than that, because that is just beginning to be a bit of a cliche in the ways of disseminating sound visually, we think. Then we also asked things like, what could an installation disseminating sound look like if it was silent, if you have to draw it as an architect? And in what ways can guests experience sound if it's not played through speakers? And why is this project even important? And so, why is it important? We have tried to develop 5 arguments for why we need such a museum. The first one is that we want to challenge the sensory hierarchies that are in the museums today and in our world. So museum practice today are very centered around our visual senses. So we go to museums to see exhibitions and experience exhibitions, but mainly through our eyes. We have seen in recent years an increased focus on sound and also soundscape, sonography and lighting. Museum collection practices are still predominantly rooted in a visual logic. Another argument was also because it is possible now, because we have new technologies that has developed over the last century and a half, that means that sound is no longer just something intangible, it is actually something that we can collect and preserve. So why not start to make museums that use all of this data and all of these sounds that we have digitally? The third one is also a very important argument. We find that we need to preserve sound as cultural heritage, but we also need to find ways of making it available, both to ourselves, but mostly also to the public. So there are a lot of collections piling up because we can collect sounds, but the collections are very scattered and a few people actually care about them. We are a lot today, but in the general public, not a lot of people actually care about this. And even fewer people know how to preserve them and how to make them available to the public. The fourth argument is that it is a new way of connecting with history, because sound has a unique ability to transport the listeners back in time and space, and recordings of the past of a radio podcast or a personal audio letter or stuff like that can maybe take us back in time even more effectively than seeing an object in a montre or stuff like that. And the last one, we also think that beyond connecting with history, because that is a goal as a museum, you want to have your guests connect with the history and what you are trying to disseminate. But it can maybe also be a new way of connecting with the world outside of the museum, because sound and listening connects us to each other, and we are also connected to sound when we hear sound, because we don't only hear it with our ears, we also feel it in our bodies in different ways than we can do when we see an object that is presented in an artifact presented in the museum. So, to the fun stuff, the exhibitions that we are planning on making to create this new and first Sonic Cultural Heritage Museum. To do this, we have developed 3 overall themes, because even though we plan on being the first Sonic Cultural Heritage Museum in the world, we need to still have kind of a focus, because we can't do it all. We need to start someplace. So we have decided to make 3 overall themes. The first one is cultural soundscapes, where we are going to focus on people and society in relation to time and place. the role of sound and listening in the creation of identities, social hierarchies, and urban space, and connecting and anchoring the cultural environments of the past and the present through sensory histories, stories, and everyday narratives. So this is also to keep in mind that we are a local history museum, so how can we find ways to use sound to tell stories about local history? The next one is connections of human and sound technology. That is also due to all the new sound technologies developing from the industrialization and what has made this project possible. So it's going to focus on how industry and communication and information society has affected and increased the production of sound, as well as led to profound changes in our cultural media habits. So in the ways that we listen and engage ourselves with sound technologies. And the last one is coexistence, and it is focused on attuning to sonic worlds and especially also more than human sonic worlds. So how can we make people aware of, for example, climate change, noise pollution, the state of the oceans, of the forest. So we like to think about this as saying, how can we help our guests to think more sonically sustainable? How can you as an individual think about the ways that you sound and how it affects both other people? For example, in a small scale, your neighbors or the people that you live with, and then take this and expand that to think about how does the way I as a human, we as human, actually affect the outside and the more than human world. So we have decided to create what we call the Hør exhibitions. And Hør is a Danish word that means hear. And so we have 4 Hør exhibitions. And the first one, the introduction, is called Lydhør, which the direct translation is sound hear. But in Danish, lydhør means to be responsive and be open to listening and to be focused. So if I'm lydhør, I am focused and responsive to listening to what you're saying. Then the next one, tilhør, directly translated to hear, but to be tilhør means to belong or a sense of belonging or to be a listening witness. So I can tilhør to a place, that means that I belong to a place, but I can also be a tilhører, which means that I am a witness to someone listening to something. Then we have the medhør exhibition, which is a Danish word which means you are on speaker. We say in Danish, you are on medhør. So it means that we are listening in on recorded sound or listening along to others' mediated sounds. So I can also be a medhører if I'm sitting in the train and someone is speaking to another person on their mobile phone, for example. And then the last one is samhør, which is meaning like kind of co-hear, which in Danish is a kind of togetherness and listening together and a connectedness. Because we say in Danish that we have samhørighed, we are together around something. And so the exhibitions, the Lydhør exhibition is going to be the first meeting with the museum exhibition, the Hør exhibitions. And here the guest begins their journey, where we invite them on a sensory experience, where the space encourages them to open their ears and connecting their bodies to sound. So the goal of this big introductory is to help the guest attuning to the format of the exhibition. How can they actually recognize that we not only hear through our ears, we can also feel vibrations in our bodies and hear sounds going from one ear to the other and stuff like that. So really trying to attune them to this kind of sensory input. And then Samhør is going to be our exit exhibition, where we are trying to focus on their auditory presence in the world and making a space where they can actually think about when do you have to turn off the music in your home? Who is choosing what music you hear? Do you speak to people on your mobile phone in public on speakerphone, stuff like that? So the goal is really to try to create discussions and reflections that can follow the guests out into the world. We are saying a lot at the museum that if we are thinking in vision, our vision stops at a wall. But if we are thinking in sound, it seeps through the wall. And that is really what we want to do with the Samhør exhibitions. We want the ideas of the museum to seep out with the guests out into the world. And so tilhør and medhør is our main exhibitions. And you can see here one of the visualization that we did with Shack Studios, where we tried to show what such a sound exhibition could actually be. And so Tilhør is our local sonic heritage exhibition, where we are really focused on the cultural soundscapes of Struer and the local identity of the city, and retelling and revisiting the local history. And so the exhibition is focused on belonging. And so as a local in Struer, when you go into this exhibition, the idea is that you should feel like you are belonging to this place. You can sense, I'm a part of this. I can hear these sounds and I remember them. But we also have a lot of tourists. So how do we create a kind of belonging for a tourist in Struer? And we think that sound is going to be a really good medium for that. Because, for example, you can see at the picture that we have church bells. So maybe you can go into the local church in Struer. And as a local, you have a special bond to this place. But as a Dane in general, you have a relationship to churches in Denmark in general. So you're going to be affected by the church bells, even though you are a tourist. We also have, for example, the local disco in Struer, which is called Disco Stephanie. Maybe you're going to step into Disco Stephanie and hear that is going to be something that you can recognize in most part of at least the Western world. So how can we use the sounds from the local sonic heritage to also affect people that don't have a local bond to this place? Then in Medhør, the guest is going to explore sound technologies that have shaped our ways and possibilities for listening over time. And so the exhibition looks to the past, to radios and earpods right now and stuff like that, and really trying to make space for especially families across generations, from small kids and maybe teenagers. How are you listening with your earpods? Maybe you can ask your grandma, how did you listen when you were a child? How did you and your friends listen to music? In which rooms and stuff like that? So, and we are also trying in this exhibition to also look into the future and maybe ask questions like, what happens when technologies start listening to us? And how does the merging of the human body and technology shape our future listening experiences, and also the way we behave around these different technologies? For example, we have talked about, as Jacob and me and some of our other colleagues, that, for example, the earpod today has introduced a new behavior, bodily behavior, that when I'm going down to the supermarket and I'm standing on the cashier, I'm doing this movement, because I'm turning off my earpod. And this is a new movement that is being introduced into our society. And so we are going to try to use the guests' own experiences to create a mirror of the similarities and differences of our mediated listening habits, to create sort of a cacophony of sounds and connections spanning through time and shifting identities. So that is the exhibitions that we are planning to create over the next few years, and how we see this Sonic Cultural Heritage Museum manifest in our vision. And so how do we make this a reality? Because we are a small local museum and we need what we are going to call scientific muscles. And to do that, we have created a new center, which I'm going to let Jacob say a lot more about. So take it from here, Jacob.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Anne-Sofie, and thank you all for attending. I'm Jakob Kreutzfeldt. I'm head of this new center. And I'll be introducing the center and somehow putting some of the questions that we will be working with throughout the next couple of years, hopefully much longer. My background is from sound studies, radio studies, but also I'm an organizer of sound art and curator of sound art. And I've been involved with the different initiatives in Struer throughout the last 6 years. The Center for Sonic Cultural Heritage, as Anne-Sofie just said, is a kind of a new institution within Struer Museum, but we are also a national institution that somehow provides a hub for the knowledge within this field. So I'm not here to give you all the answers, but also to put the questions, and maybe we can think together, and maybe also you can also be a part of the work that we will be doing for the next couple of years. We are a really new center. We were established by the 1st of November. I can only mostly say what we plan to do rather than what we have done. But of course, it's all related to what Anne-Sofie said about the plans for a new museum, and also how to think cultural heritage, the cultural heritage of sound within museum institutions. I'd like to start off with our mission and vision. So our vision is that sonic cultural heritage will be a central concern in the development of collections, knowledge and mediations at museums, and thus in the broader understanding of past, present and future. So we have a big aim. I mean, we want to make sound a more central concern for people generally when we think about our history, our background, but also our future. But the way that we want to do that is to work through museums, through the practices of museums. Our mission is to collect knowledge about sonic cultural heritage and share that knowledge with actors at museums, research and knowledge institutions. We are, as I said at the beginning, we are more like mediators of a knowledge exchange and transfer of knowledge than we are the only experts within the field. I'm sure many of you here know much more about this field than we do at the moment. Anne-Sofie said a little bit about the whole kind of context that we are within, but I just wanted to unfold that a bit more. The reason why it makes sense to make such a center at Struer Museum, but also in the city of Struer, is that there are so many local competences and histories around sound and heritage. We have this project of being the city of sound. It was kicked off in 2013, and this is merely an overview of all the things that have unfolded within that initiative, and a kind of a story and an identity for Struer that is still growing. So, of course, we have initiatives at Struer Museum, the Lydunivers, the Sound Universe, but also Struer Tracks, the biannual for sound art. We have the Sound Hub Denmark, innovation environment for startups and companies working within sound. We have Sound Art Lab, a lab facility for artists working with sound. And here we are. So, of course, these are all the kind of our friends locally that help us, bring forth this agenda. I'm just going to go through some of the kind of conceptual concerns within the idea of being a center for sonic cultural heritage. And at least, we need to be clear about what is cultural heritage. What do we mean when we say sonic cultural heritage? It's not a word that people would generally just say, I know what you mean. So we are also trying to develop this conceptual approach to a particular kind of cultural heritage. I'm sure many of you in this room are museum people, so you may know the kind of the ICOM definition of what a museum is. But what a museum does is to research, collect, conserve, interpret, and exhibit tangible and intangible heritage. And I'll get back to these two different ideas of what heritage is, that it can both be tangible as an object, but it can also be intangible. These are definitions or concepts coming from UNESCO that I'll get back to. But the word of cultural heritage is also very important in the Danish museum sector. As you see in the present Danish museum law, the task for a museum is to actualize knowledge on culture and natural heritage, to develop the use of culture and natural heritage, and so on. So cultural heritage is actually what museums do within the cultural sector of museums. There will be a new museum law from next year, and there's still some development going on there, but at least I want to say that the three central tasks of the Danish museums will be collection development, knowledge development, and mediation. The thing that we fit into the most is, of course, knowledge development, but we want to have a conversation about how do we develop collections within sonic cultural heritage. So to dig further into this idea of cultural heritage, there may be three kind of overall approaches to what a cultural heritage is. The one is to say we understand cultural heritage as that which is defined by professionals within the field. So we may have one idea of what cultural heritage is at Struer Museum. At another type of museum, maybe a music history museum, they may have another idea, and they are experts within their field. So simply, there's a kind of a professional practice defining what we understand by cultural heritage. So we have both kind of the objects that are movable cultural heritage, but we also have buildings that are permanent cultural heritage. But there's also a political kind of discourse around cultural heritage, where cultural heritage becomes somehow equivalent of national identity. So we want to define ourselves as through particular objects. We had a politically initiated project about the cultural canon of Denmark, where particular objects were chosen to somehow signify that as being Danish. And we had a project where the national dish of Denmark was selected to be...
Var det smørbrød?
Nej,
Flæskesauce.
Exactly. And we see the minister with a delicious dish. But there might also be a kind of a more theoretical discussion of what is cultural heritage. One somehow related to the ideas like identity, collective memory, musealization, and so on. And we want to somehow, work through all these different approaches to what is cultural heritage. Of course, very important when we talk about cultural heritage is UNESCO, the international organization within the United Nations that work within this field. And they distinguish between these two, the tangible and the intangible. And I wanted to bring this definition from the convention. Intangible cultural heritage means the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith that communities, groups, and in some cases, individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. So what is important here is that when we talk about intangible cultural heritage, we talk about something that is not objectified, but there may be some objects that somehow relate to it. That could be instruments, objects, artifacts, cultural spaces, so on. Actually, maybe it's difficult to always distinguish between the two. There's an interesting interplay between that which is intangible that we want to maintain, keep for the future, and the tangible objects that somehow relate to that, which is very important for the way that we approach sound. So what might sonic cultural heritage be? Of course, sonic concerning sound, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the word sonic, but we will somehow pursue these three different approaches to sonic cultural heritage. One would be pragmatic, saying what is already there. We look around, we see what is at museums that somehow have to do with sound. Quite a lot of things, actually. I'll get back to that in a moment. Another one would be programmatic, what should be there. I think Anne-Sofie touched upon a lot of interesting examples of what would be interesting to somehow maintain for the future. We could maybe identify gaps in what is there now. We could say, interesting, we have some music, we have some radio, but what about podcast? I don't know. And then maybe the last approach would be to think about this intangible character of sound, that all the objects that may be available in archives, at museum storages, are always somehow objects that relate to the intangible heritage that sound is. So how do we actually, also on a more theoretical level, how do we approach this intangible heritage that has to do with the ways we engaged in the world beforehand? And maybe that's a very abstract idea, but I think the way that we can understand the future is not only through seeing an object, a plow, for example, but to somehow try to envision how the plowing went on. I think that's the same analogy of how we can maybe try to understand listening cultures and sound cultures from the past. So here are just some examples, and I'm sure we could discuss, what would be heritage for us in sonic cultural heritage? Of course, there are some maybe old recordings. There are some objects like radios or other technologies, phonographs for recording, but also playing sound. But we could also discuss, are these practices relating to newlywed couples? Would that be a type of cultural heritage? Would the sound of windmills, would a podcast or the sound of a boat engine somehow apply to be a cultural heritage? And what would that mean? Back to the question that I posed earlier on, what is there already? We have had the option of starting a smaller project where we are somehow trying to look into what is at the moment collected in museums in Denmark. And it's a really, even posing that question is somehow challenging, because if we ask a museum curator, what is the sonic heritage within your collection? They are like, we don't know. What do you mean about sonic heritage? We tried to look through the central system for museums called SARA. That is a museum where all museums register their collections. And we tried to search for objects that somehow related to sound. And we found 40,000 objects at Danish museums. And here you can see maybe that's it's difficult to read, but the National Museum, of course, has the most of them. But also Museum West Zealand, and then Struer Museum, and Udsen Museum, and Rømer in Roskilde. That's where we found the most objects. Of course, I should say this is only a probing within the field, because there's not a tag in SARA saying sonic cultural heritage, but we tried to collect all the tags that could somehow be related to sound. Oh yeah, just zooming in on the same. So now you can actually see them. And here you also distinguish between types of objects. What types of objects are those? And of course, most of them are music, but also sound and image reproduction technology, but also songs and radiophonia or radio, sound tapes, tales. And as you see, this is not a kind of a taxonomy that is really easy to work with, because they somehow overlap. We also have drums and percussion instruments. And then we have another one saying instruments. So, it's very unordered, but it gives an impression of what are the types of objects within the field. Maybe that is a place to start in saying, actually, we do have a sonic cultural heritage. And this is only the museums. If the next part would be to go to archives, where they have huge collections of radio and other types of material. Back to what we are going to do, and this will be the last kind of rounding off of our presentation. The purpose of the center is, as I said earlier on, to act as a national hub for knowledge about cultural heritage. So we need you guys to become more clever in this field. We're not going to collect things. We're not going to exhibit things, but we are, of course, collaborating closely with the museums, but we are going to collaborate with other museums as well. We will work with these 3 pillars, as I introduced, that is a part of the new national law for museums: collection development, knowledge development, and mediation. And I didn't say that in the beginning, but we are actually working within Struer Museum, but we are established by 4 institutions: the National Museum of Denmark, Aarhus University, and Sound Art Lab. They are all represented in our board, but also for the management, it's me, it's Anne-Sofie as a part of her full-time job, and then it's Daniela, who's a scientific assistant and sound designer. These are some of the fields that we will be working on, these 3 legs: how to offer methods and tools for collection development, knowledge development, and mediation, to somehow collect and disseminate knowledge about these fields. Our immediate plans for that is, of course, to maintain a national network and have network seminars within the field, to have international conferences within the field, have PhD courses. We will build a database of projects. I think one of the reasons why this is a good idea to have a center like that is that there are actually a lot of projects happening within the fields, but as projects do, they end. So we would like to somehow collect some of the knowledge from all the things happening around. We're doing a literature review at the moment, mapping best practices for museological approaches to sonic cultural heritage. And then we run a museological laboratory for sound at Struer Museum. That is a kind of a close collaboration with the museum. Of course, we're very interested in all these developments taking place at the museum, how that, we are not there to make them, but we are there to distract some knowledge from them. We'll do research publications, guest programs for researchers and curators, and of course communication and other outreach activities. So that was it for me and for Anne-Sofie, and so we thank you for the attention. Please follow the center at LinkedIn. We have a newly started LinkedIn page, but it will be more active. And also let me know now or by mail if you want to be a part of the network.